15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. We have a liftoff. Liftoff on Apollo 11.
Shadow. 4 forward, drift into the right a little. 30 seconds forward, drift. Contact light. Okay, engine stop.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Roger, Tranquility. We copy you on the ground.
Armstrong is on the moon. Neil Armstrong, 38-year-old American, standing on the surface of the moon. On this July 20th, 1969.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Apollo 11, this is Hornet, over.
Apollo 11, this is Apollo 11, reading you loud and clear. Our position 1330.
Neil Armstrong's One Small Step on the lunar surface in 1969 achieved a goal that sounded like science fiction just a few years earlier. It took 10 years for President JFK's dream of landing a man on the moon to become a reality. It all started with the space race of the 50s and 60s, when US and the USSR were both trying to prove its supremacy as a superpower. During the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union engaged a competition to see who had the best technology in space. This included such events as who could put the first manned spacecraft into orbit and who would be the first to walk on the moon. The space race was considered important because it showed the world which country had the best science, technology, and economic system. The space race began in 1955 when both countries announced that they would soon be launching satellites into orbit. On October 4th, 1957, the Russians placed the first successful satellite into orbit. It was called Sputnik 1. The Russians had taken the lead in the space race. The Americans successfully launched their first satellite 4 months later, called the Explorer 1. The Soviets again won the race for putting the first man into space. On April 12, 1961, Yuri Gagarin was the first man to orbit the Earth in the spacecraft Vostok 1. The Americans were embarrassed at being behind in the space race. In 1961, President Kennedy went to Congress and announced that he wanted to be the first to put a man on the moon. He felt that this was important for the country and the Western world. The Apollo Moon program was launched.
But why, some say, the moon? Why choose this as our goal? And they may well ask, why climb the highest mountain? Why, 35 years ago, fly the Atlantic? Why does Rice play Texas? We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to all. It was the mission of Apollo 11 to land 2 men on the moon, then return them safely to Earth. It was one of the most historic events. It demonstrated what man can do with effort and ingenuity. The Apollo 11 crew on board was Neil Armstrong, the commander, Michael Collins, the command module pilot, and Edwin E. Aldrin, Jr., the lunar module pilot. After traveling 240,000 miles in 76 hours, Apollo 11 entered into a lunar orbit on July 19th. During the landing, there were several problems with the mission computer, and to avoid a crash, Armstrong had to take manual control of the landing craft. They eventually landed with only 25 seconds of fuel left. Armstrong became the first human to walk on the moon's surface, with his first words being, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." The event was broadcast to a global audience of around 600 million people. The one small step for man wasn't actually that small. Armstrong set the ship down so gently that its shock absorbers didn't compress. He had to hop 3.5 feet from the Eagle's ladder to the surface. President Nixon made what has been termed the most historic long-distance phone call ever made from the White House,
when he called to congratulate them. The crew spent a total of 2.5 hours on the moon's surface. While on the moon's surface, they performed a variety of experiments and collected soil and rock samples to return to Earth. An American flag was left on the moon's surface as a reminder of the accomplishment. Among the items left on the surface of the moon was a plaque that read, "Here men from the planet Earth first set foot on the moon on July 1969. After death, we came in peace for all mankind."
Before any celebrations, the triumphant Apollo 11 astronauts were greeted with a more mundane aspect of life on Earth when they splashed down, going through customs. For astronauts returning from the moon wasn't a simple matter of splashing down. Back then, the moon was still unknown enough that the scientists at NASA were worried that the moon germs might infect and wipe out the human race. For this reason, the Apollo 11 astronauts had to be restrained to a 3-week quarantine before they could enjoy ticker tape parades in New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles. The flight of Apollo 11 met with an ecstatic reaction around the globe, as everyone shared in the success of the astronauts. The front page of newspapers everywhere suggested how strong the enthusiasm was. NASA estimated that because of the nearly worldwide radio and television coverage, more than half the population of the planet was aware of the events of Apollo 11.
The wives of these men suddenly became popular, having lunch with Jackie Kennedy at the White House, throwing huge parties, and being recognized for being the wives of these men. A state dinner was also held in Los Angeles, where the astronauts were awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom by U.S. President Richard Nixon. The U.S. celebration post the quarantine included a 45-day giant leap tour that saw the astronauts visit 25 foreign countries and meet their prominent leaders, such as the United Kingdom's Queen Elizabeth II. Many nations would honor the first manned moon landing by issuing Apollo 11 commemorative stamps or coins. On September 16, 1969, the 3 astronauts spoke before a joint session of Congress, where they presented 2 U.S. flags that had been carried to the surface of the moon with them. Although the Soviet Union tried to jam Voice of America radio broadcasts, most living there and in other countries learned about the adventure and followed it carefully.
We all are of what you... For every American, this has to be the proudest day of our lives.
Even though many people enjoyed the life after Apollo, the astronauts' lives took a ride for the worst. Buzz Aldrin became an alcoholic and got divorced, ending his 21-year marriage with his wife. He remarried desperately, and 2 years later, he got divorced again. He couldn't handle the pressure of success. Neil Armstrong had many heart complications and died in Cincinnati, Ohio, in 2010. Many astronauts went through their post-Apollo years being unrecognized.